Welcome to this episode of B2B Revealed. If you want to learn about how to succeed in B2B, this is the show for you. My name is Sean Campbell, and I'm the host of B2B Revealed. I love to hear from listeners about any topic you might like me to cover in the future on the show. To send me a suggestion, just email me at sean@cascadeinsights.com. And if you love this podcast, don't forget to give us a review on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you happen to listen to the show. On this episode, I'll be interviewing Matt Ipri. Matt is the Vice President of Marketing and Business Development at Decision Lens. Matt has a unique perspective on marketing challenges that startups and mid-market companies might face. I'm sure you're going to love hearing what Matt has to say. Also, as a side note, over the next 4 to 6 interviews on the show, you'll notice a bit of variance in the audio quality from interview to interview. That's because I'm experimenting with a few different services to record these interviews, including Ringer, Zencaster, IPDTL, and Skype. Once I give each one a run for their money, I'll let you know which one I found out to be the best. Now, on to the show. As I mentioned earlier, today on the show, we have Matt Ipri. Matt has worked in enterprise software for more than 10 years in multiple leadership roles across product management, product marketing, and general marketing. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Why don't you tell me a little bit, just because it's particularly germane to what we're going to cover, tell me a little bit about what Decision Lens has done and is doing as they move forward and how your role relates to some of those initiatives.
Sure. So Decision Lens, we're a small software company. I like to tell people we are sort of just past startup. We are, barely bigger than a normal startup, but big enough where we've got enough of a customer base that helps us to fund new initiatives and think about growing forward. And so we sort of have a well-funded startup type feel. We've been in business about 10 years and have had a nice background and nice growth initially in the public sector. And the business has grown well around public sector. And so the challenge that we're facing now is we'd like to grow in the commercial private sector area, and we think we could see really even more growth, in those industries moving forward. And so we're trying to really crack the code of the best way to use software like ours in an industry where we never really have sold terribly successfully before, and where not a lot of customers are using solutions like ours just yet.
That's fair. And I think a lot of marketers would have that problem as the company matures, right? They either offer a new product line and that targets a different set of buyer personas, or they take their current product and they realize there's opportunity in another vertical. And, no vertical likes to be treated like the other, either from a sales or a marketing standpoint. So how does that represent itself effectively? Let's just start with on your guys' website. Like, what do you do so that each individual industry feels like you're talking to them directly? I mean, you've got clear things like, hey, this node is for you and this node's for you. But from a tactics and strategy standpoint, what do you guys start thinking about?
It's an interesting challenge, and I'll be the first to admit that we probably don't have it figured out exactly right, because we're facing this double-edged challenge a bit where we have a great public sector business and that continues to grow and we continue to invest in that. And we don't ever want to sort of shortchange that. But we have this new sort of growing commercial business that we also want to grow. And so when you think about things like the website, if you find the site via an AdWord, or you find it via campaign, or maybe via a sales activity, you'll hopefully be directed in the right way based on where you got there. But when you come organically, like say you saw us at an event, or you are just searching around or heard our name or were referred to us, and you come sort of to the decisionlens.com homepage, that's the challenge we're still trying to work out. How do we work with you to isolate your problem, your place, your journey without creating this very odd, website interaction? And so what we've tried to do, and you'll see some of this there, is we try and start a little at the highest level of what's the Decision Lens brand? What are we trying to bring across to all sectors, to all verticals? What's our big sort of, whether it's a big differentiator or a big problem statement or big whatever it is, and then right away try and get at the verticals you might be coming from. And so we present you, and the three big ones for us right now are capital planning and sort of government budgeting and this IT prioritization. And so we try and bring those up to you right away. That way even if you're coming from a public sector, but you're interested in IT, you'll sort of go down a path. Or if you're coming from private sector and you might be doing some capital planning, you'll go down the right path. We try and hit you with the solution or the problem that you may have come to us for, and not try and do some sort of funky segmenting like asking, hey, are you in industry X or industry Y? Now, in all fairness, Sean, I'd be the first to admit we don't have it quite figured out, and there are probably better ways out there where folks have thought through, do you just ask some leading questions? And so we're really in a pretty experimentation time for us, and so we do different A/B testing just on when you get to the site, and we try and find better ways to get them through a journey there.
Those are all really good points. So does the data you have on the site, Google Analytics, et cetera, whatever you guys use, does it show you that people tend to stay kind of in their island or in their lane per se? They tend to stick, if the visitor hits the site and they go to public sector, do they tend to kind of stay in that corridor, or do they leak out into other parts of the site?
Interestingly, the data hasn't always told us exactly what we thought, and we see that they actually tend to leak around. And the way they leak around is in some of an expected way. First of all, since they're coming in via a solution perspective, it's not uncommon for a new prospect who's sort of learning about your organization and kicking some tires to want to see all the different things you do. So you might bounce from one solution to another. That's not unexpected. But where we see they tend to, and you use a good word there, sort of leak around, is they like to look at references and case studies from all the different sectors, sort of regardless of where, even if they came in for an IT prioritization solution maybe, and there's a couple customers there on those pages, a couple case studies. They often will read lots of different customer information, even about those who are doing capital planning or doing budgeting in different ways. And it makes sense, right? If you think about a buyer journey, references or just proving out that someone else has success with this can make a lot of sense. So seeing them leak into there is a bit of an expected leak, and then we just try and make sure we have enough offerings, whether it's get in touch with us, get a demo, watch a video, to try and capture their interest as they kick around and move with it.
That's great points. And like you said, I think it's somewhat expected, especially when it gets to like testimonials and case studies, that they'll figure out that, hey, if you're solving for roughly the same problem, I'm happy to look at somebody in another industry. What about content, though? What content are you building, or how do you try to build content? This is maybe the question the listeners would have, is how do I not triple my content budget if I now have all these individual industries to go for? Like, how do I maximize maybe a single asset or things along those lines?
Yeah, and again, first admit we're not perfect at this, but here's what we're experimenting. And I'm going to take it back just a second, because we face a bit of a double-fold problem, and I'm sure some of your other organizations feel the same way. We're not only having to convince or even appeal to a new person when they come to the site that Decision Lens is a great fit for them or a great use for them. We also have to appeal to this new category, this new market of solutions that we're trying to sell into, that most likely they've never bought a solution for before. They've never bought software for before, never bought a tool for before. And so when we think about content and we think about a visitor coming to the site, we try and think about both steps of this buyer journey. And I know that's a phrase maybe people overuse, but we believe we've got to convince a buyer of two real things. We've got to first convince them that there is some reason to even consider a solution like this. Like, have they ever thought about strategic portfolio management in a software perspective, or as other analysts call it, like strategy execution? Have they ever looked at strategy execution and thought about software built for that? And most likely they haven't. So then what do we show them that, hey, this is worthwhile? This is what differentiates strategy execution from all the other software you've bought. And so we think about that and we try and have content based on that. And usually it's content based on our brand at the high level about what Decision Lens really is, and then some thought leadership around our point of view on these areas. And so we build some content there and try and reuse that as best we can. And then as they either get deeper into the site or through a cycle with us, we like to have content that meets the second question of the overall problem, which is, okay, if we've convinced you that there's some kind of need or desire for strategy execution software, how do we then, prove to you that Decision Lens is the best option for you to look at it? And so we've got some content more focused on that piece of the journey that really describes maybe us against Excel, which is most often what we're replacing, or us against status quo, or even then, just some general features and functionality about Decision Lens that you're not interested in if you're just at the first stage in the journey. And so, long answer to your question, we build a lot of content. I'd like us to build a lot more, but it's like you said, it's a challenge of how do you have enough people, enough time, enough budget to build all those things. But we do try and make sure we cover the bases to hit the big pieces of the journey and maybe the big pieces of the buying cycle, at least with one or two things, and at least with some kind of video, some kind of reference, and some kind of takeaway, because we know, and you probably know this better than me, from your background, that by the time these prospects talk with us as a vendor, as a solution provider, they've done a lot of their own research. They've learned about you. And so we've got to put enough out there for that self-directed learning, that self-directed, understanding, we can make some sense out of.
Excellent points. And I think people that are developing content marketing today probably have felt similar pains when you talk about it. And the point about defining the category and the product, you're right. That's a double pain that I think a lot of technology companies in specific, given that's at least who we work with as a firm predominantly, they deal with that all the time, right? That, the first guy to launch a big campaign of you should use Hadoop for big data, which now everybody would say, oh, sure, absolutely, right? Well, that first guy, he has a very different problem, right? I mean, he's got to convince everybody that's a smart idea conceptually, this idea of big data or this idea of Internet of Things. Or if you're Elon Musk landing rockets tail first, you have to explain the concept that it's even smart before you even get to the technology. So how does that play out in terms of your guys' strategy development? Where do you feel like you have to spend the bulk of the time today? And perhaps more importantly, how do you determine success? Like when you've done a really good job defining the category and getting that figured out in people's minds versus getting them to consider you within the category.
Yeah, and this is the question we fight amongst ourselves internally here the most, because we are, like I said, we're a bit just past startup, but we're certainly not large. And so with that in mind, our marketing budget and our ability to sort of put out, whether it's content and campaigns, is limited. Just naturally we're not huge, and we're not venture backed. So it's not like we've got millions to put out there around awareness. And so we look, every planning cycle, and even throughout the year, we're looking at our dollars to try and figure out how much is going towards what we may call category awareness or market awareness, and how much is going towards sort of true campaigns, like solution campaigns. And we try and make sure they're at least somewhat balanced. Now, I would say in the last few years, we are investing more on the category and market awareness side, just because we know the first stage in this problem has got to be to build out this category somehow. And so that includes a bunch of things. It includes some sort of point of view, thought leadership pieces that come from us, but it also includes two other things that really almost have nothing to do with us. We do a lot of influencer outreach and influencer work, and that's via the technology analysts, the third-party analysts, the names that are out there. We try and work with them to let them know that, hey, we exist and we're being bought and people are thinking about this in a new way, and try and sort of subtly convince them to put out materials around this category and around this market, because those things go a long way. When you're included in one of those fancy pants 2x2 matrices, or in one of those, ocean looking things, it means a lot to someone who's considering buying a solution. And so our analyst outreach and our analyst time and our analyst events it makes up a good chunk of our time. And so we do that, and how we met you, we also have spent some time and some money just trying to do some market research around the category, even beyond Decision Lens, just trying to learn A, what people think about this category, B, what people are doing around this category, and then subtly also trying to influence their thought that, hey, this category exists and there might be solutions out there for you. And so we're pretty heavy on this on the front end of the category and market side, because we know it's so much of this problem. If we ever want to get to sort of hockey stick growth or really growing in commercial, we know we got to start with a good category and a good business problem, and then we've got to trust that we have a good software solution that we're going to be able to sell them on. So it's a it's a bit of a balancing act, a bit of a seesaw, and I know maybe a broken record, but we don't have it quite figured out. But we try and pay attention to it a lot because the dollars only go so far, and we need a place to put them.
Yeah, and you guys have plenty of it figured out. I mean, in the sense of, you guys are doing a good job growing, and you've got a lot of great customers. But I get your point, and I appreciate that, and I bet a lot of the people listening do too. The somebody who can humbly say, I'm doing well, but I still don't have it all figured out is a good thing. So one question I imagine people might have had when you were going through that is, especially for the companies that are in your position, what is a good way to deal with the analysts when you're trying to get them to pay attention to a category, right? You picture the day where they launch the magic quadrant of your category and you are magically in the upper right. You know what I mean? Like that's the holy grail, I think, for some of the smaller companies we work with, where that's what they would hope would happen. But that's a very different relationship, I think, that you need to establish with the analysts than being analyst relations in a large enterprise software company that's been in one of those magic quadrants or the equivalent for the last 20 years, and they're just kind of carrying where their little dot moves.
Yeah.
You guys have to talk to the analysts very differently. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, we do. And I came from a larger software firm before I joined here, and luckily in that case we were in a very defined category, and our dot was in the upper right, quite often, which was great. And so we spent a lot of our time that dot positioning, and those demos and those feature things were really the most important in that area. But here you're right, it's a big challenge, and it's a lot of time. And this is an area where sort of me personally, as sort of the department leader, I do a lot of this myself because we just find it to be so important. And it starts with a lot of I would call sort of brute force analyst relations, and that means lots of conversations. We spent I've been in decisions now just about a little under 5 years, and when we started there, they certainly didn't have anywhere near a category for our type of solution, and so we were misaligned. We were actually working with the analysts in the business intelligence area, and we're not really you know, uh, we'd be crazy to consider ourselves a business intelligence tool. But we talk with all those analysts repeatedly and share the way we were a little bit different, the way we were thinking about the problem. And the one thing I always recommend, and this has been big for us, is recommend as many of your customers and even prospects as you can to call directly and ask for their advice on this area. And this could be any of the analyst firms, any of the big two or the many below that. Encourage them to do research via the analyst, because the more the analyst hears the category or your name or one of your competitors' names, that's what goes a long way to convincing them there's something there. And so we've spent, endlessly. We've identified at the big firms probably 5 or 6 or 8 analysts at each one, and I try and make sure we're in front of them at least every other month. And that's just with a sort of an inquiry conversation where we're just chatting, we're asking them a business question, or that we've pushed one of our prospects who's analyzing us or one of our customers to give them a call and just ask the same kind of inquiry conversation. And so it's really about you're creating mind share in their brain. These folks are they're smart people, and I'll never be the one to denigrate them, but their opinions come from what they hear and what they see. And they're affected by the vendors, just like they're affected by the sort of end user customers who are asking the same questions. And so the more airtime your category and your solution are getting with them, the better shot you have of getting that 2x2, done with your name on it. And so it's a lot of brute force. We had to move from that BI category eventually to the sort of PPM category that we're now covered by them mainly, and still not a perfect fit. But now we've got some folks who get the problem space, and now we're working on them to really carve out a subcategory essentially that really focus on the area we do, and luckily some other vendors do it, and some other people are talking about it to try and push them to keep writing and keep covering. It's a brute force game, unfortunately.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think for a lot of companies of your size or around your size, they might feel that I don't really have a good playbook for dealing with the analyst community, right? If you're a large company, they're almost knocking on your door anyway, just to sell you subscriptions to their services, if nothing else, right?
Yeah.
But that was a really good summation of what you guys go about, and I think a lot of folks can learn from that. So one last area I actually want to rewind back into, because I think people also face this challenge, is what if you're competing with your customer? You mentioned to some degree that some of what you end up running into is they're using Excel in a pretty advanced way, or they just have solved a problem with internal tools. And you come along and you say, well, we've got a much better way to do it. Because I think that's a very, very different content marketing challenge. It's a very different messaging challenge, because you don't want to tell the customer that they're doing something wrong, but there is a degree of inadequacy to it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to provide any value.
Yeah. And honestly, that's our biggest competition almost across the board. We certainly run into other vendors, time and time, but we are competing with status quo almost every time. And I think that's to be expected. We talked a lot about this idea of creating a category. Well, we're creating a category because the people we would like to sell to and for them to buy haven't bought this yet. That's why no category exists. And so you really, when you're talking with a person, like I said, there's this twofold sort of sales pitch, and it all starts with building the category. And so we've had to spend a lot of time not only building the materials and the sort of point of view and the messaging and the value prop around what we do, but also then some of the, you know, change management and process management that's got to go with implementing a new solution. Because when none existed before, there's no easy way. They don't have an owner inside their business. They don't have a process defined around this solution. So there's some natural discomfort and change there. And quite often we get told, many of my guys who have heard this would tell you the same thing. They say, we hear all the time, oh, this is so cool. I had no idea it existed, but nah, I'm not sure we're really ready for this yet. And you have to read between the lines there. And what that means is, well, I haven't really thought about this before. If I take this on, I have to change process X, process Y. I've got to get person A, person B involved. And am I up for that? Is my pain big enough that I'm willing to be the champion and the change agent inside my organization to really make this happen? And when you don't have the right sort of champion, you're not in the right place, you get that sort of I'm not ready and status quo is good enough, and you lose in that cycle. But I think what we found is really interesting is that there's a positive to creating a category as well. There's a positive to only really replacing status quo more often than not as well. And that is they remember that they talk to you. And, we like to joke that it takes a few orbits around every organization to really get a customer there. And so when you come back the second time, the third time, you say, hey, they remember that they liked it and they've now seen maybe more of the pain that you can solve for them. And you're at a nice first mover kind of area. That when you're in a very defined market, you don't get to have that. In your defined market, they say, okay, I've got A, you're B. Is B better than A? It makes worth my time to rip out A and put in B. We're not competing with that. We're really competing with, will you get enough value from this category to give it a try? And, can we build up your confidence and your willingness to engage on the change to give the category a try, and then therefore give Decision Lens a try? And so it's it's certainly a different kind of sales challenge than many organizations will have, but it's a pretty interesting one, and it certainly keeps us busy on different ways to attack it and break through.
Yeah, you basically end up becoming, if done well, you're a magic quadrant of one, which is a really great place to be at that point, because they don't have anyone else to turn to for an extended period of time, until of course the category does become defined, and now you guys are facing three other people that are at least saying they're lookalikes, even if they're not.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing there is because what we do face in terms of competition tend to be from existing solutions that do a little bit of the process we offer. So, without getting too deep into it, this idea of strategy execution or strategic portfolio management, there are certainly other solutions out there who will market to that area, whether it's the PPM vendors, the BI vendors, maybe even some of the IT financial management vendors. There are other vendors talking about it. And in some ways, it's great, for the category. You want more and more in there, talking about it to really make sure it's there. So I got to imagine someday when there is a quadrant, we're going to have some other category vendors, other solutions in there amongst some of the pure plays like us, as they figure out what's best. And then it's the age old question, what's better, the sort of platform solution that does a whole lot, or the sort of niche best of breed solution that does exactly what you're looking for? And we will welcome that that competition when it truly hits home.
Well, Matt, I just want to thank you for being on the show. You've got a lot of great perspectives to share, and I think a lot of people of your size, or even in a product group of your size in a larger company, can resonate with a lot of the things you shared. So thanks again for joining. And to our listeners, thanks for listening to this episode of the show. And don't forget to visit us at cascadeinsights.com.